Welcome to episode number 1 of the Pioneers Tutoring and Speech podcast called Your Child is Not the Problem. Every episode, we sit down with people who are experts in their field who are turning struggling kids into confident learners. And today, we're interviewing Gabriella Gray, founder and CEO of Pioneers Tutoring and Speech, and she's going to be talking about the ins and outs of the company. Let's get into it. All right, Gabby. So obviously, I know your story quite well, obviously, being your brother. And I know that you didn't speak until about 4 years old, and then you left school in year 7, unable to read. So take us back to that moment. What was going on for you at that time?
I remember feeling like the problem was me. So I remember not really communicating about it too much to my parents, to teachers, to my friends. I was sort of concerned with just trying to get by without anyone sort of realizing that I was struggling as much as I actually was. So, things like in the classroom when the teacher would say, okay, open up to page 67, we're going to read 67, 68 and do the activities. I would sort of be trying to work out, through visual, pictures or if there was like highlighted text or, those text boxes that are usually like a different color and maybe the text is a different sort of font. I'd sort of use those to try and find the key parts of what they were trying to teach and then be able to roll off an answer to sort of just get by. So I was doing a lot of that. And I just remember thinking that this was getting to a point where I couldn't cover it up anymore. So year 7 was like, prior to that point, I felt like I could cover up, my struggles with literacy and I could cover up with how far I was falling behind in math. Now it was starting to, it sort of dawned on me that this problem wasn't going anywhere and it was getting worse.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And where do you think that problem stems from? Like these kids, so you were obviously struggling in a certain area as far as reading and being able to comprehend what you're reading. Where do you think that stems from in the school system? Because I know that a lot of kids these days, I think it's 1 in 5 are dyslexic. So where do you think that problem stems from?
Yeah, I think it's definitely early intervention, like not getting the intervention early enough. Because 2 things happen. One is obviously you fall behind in terms of the content. So if you haven't got that intervention in say grades 1 and 2, by the time you get to grade 3, you're so far behind with what the curriculum is and what the sort of status quo is in the classroom that you're not getting anything. But the second thing that happens is that your confidence has been so shot because you haven't got that support. So you haven't been shown that, okay, you might not have got it in the group setting, but if we took you aside and we did some intervention work, you would start to see that you would progress. If you don't get that early enough, then the confidence goes and then you get more and more of a withdrawal and refusal to try.
Yeah.
And so that's by those 2 factors, by the time you get a kid into high school, they've kind of dropped the idea of ever being academic. And you get ideas where they think like the only option for them is to go to TAFE or do something hands-on or do something that they can do that they're socially good at, maybe like a sales role. Not that, any of those professions aren't great. It's just if that wasn't the area that they could reach their full potential in and the thing that was stopping them was their literacy, that's sort of the thing that that's the thing that I struggle to be okay with.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I'm actually in sales. But yeah, look, when I was at school, I remember when I would read stuff, get books that we would have to read, whether it was over the school break or at home. Where does sort of interest lie in that? Like, I felt like when I came out of school, I got really interested in certain subjects, whether it was business or sales or whatever it was. And I felt like I had a motivation around learning, right? But in the school system, I feel like that part is missed. And maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't. But like, where does it come into it where we sort of consult the interests and the purpose for why that student is learning that subject or topic or reading that certain book? Because I found when I left school, I was like, oh, I'm really interested in this. Now I have a motivation for reading. Whereas at school, I couldn't get through the novels that they would assign because I would just be like, this is just boring.
Yeah. I think that's important even really early on. So one of the things that we do at Pioneers is we make sure that we get to know the student when they first come, before they've even done a session. And the reason for that is because that idea of interest or even purpose as well, like the student knowing, why am I learning this? You know, that is really important so that you get participation. So a lot of teachers will talk about the child not being engaged, or perhaps they can't get the participation sort of there, and that comes back to, I think, kids not having it. One of two things again: it's not having an interest or not having a purpose. So they haven't understood why they're doing that lesson, why they should have their put their attention on the teacher, that kind of thing. So what we do is we give them that purpose. That's the very first thing that we do. But even prior to that, before that, we'll get into communication with them. We'll talk to them and say, like, how was your day? If we know that they like motorcycle riding, did you ride your motorcycle on the weekend? And then you get some interest there where they're like, okay, cool. This person knows who I am. They know what I like. Now I'm a bit interested in the session. And then using those interests in the session to get them to read is 100% one of the best strategies ever.
Yeah, totally. Couldn't agree more. And now I know something about you, which is that you. It's good.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't good, but then it gets good. So you were unable to read at 13.
Yep.
And fast forward to 21,
Mm-hmm.
you had your bachelor's and master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was out without finishing year 12.
Yep.
Right? How does that actually happen?
It happened over a number of years. So when I finished year 7, I started homeschooling myself. And the good thing about being homeschooling is that it's at your own pace. So I was in year 7, but some of the workbooks that I was working on were sort of at a grade 5, 6 level. And it was going back to those basics where I was able to pick up those things that I'd missed in the classroom, going back to falling behind, not picking up anything in the classroom, but then also your confidence shattered as well. Those things don't come into play when you're homeschooling because it's just you and your parent or whoever's helping you with the homeschooling, and there's no spectators or people. Because in my mind, it was like when I was sitting in the classroom, everybody else understood it. I was the only one that didn't understand it, or I was the only one that couldn't do it. Everybody else could do it. So it was that environment is a very sort of dangerous environment for a kid, when you're 12 years old. So definitely going back and being able to consolidate all that knowledge that I sort of missed. And I'd say even going back even earlier than that, like some stuff from grade 3, you're expected to pick up in grade 3. I went back and learn. And then I picked up, I think from that point, I picked up a lot of foundational stuff. So my reading did get better. It wasn't until I actually started studying how to teach other kids that I learned about phonics, and I learned about sounds, and I learned that there were actually 44 sounds, for example, which I had no idea that there were, and there were graphemes, and I learned that there was this whole technology around teaching spelling and reading that I myself didn't know. So that was like really interesting for me because it's something that I wanted to resolve within myself. Was it me, or was it I wasn't taught? Was I really, the sort of commentary from school was that I was very social, and that I was very lazy. So I wanted to see whether that was true because it didn't feel right for me because I was constantly trying hard. So it didn't sort of sit right. And then, so through my uni degree, I started getting exposed to these sorts of things, and I got interested in other programs. So other programs like the Thrust program, which is an amazing spelling and reading program from the UK. I did all the professional development that they could offer around that, and I started working with these trainers, I think that they're called, or whatever.
Yeah.
The people that did the course or delivered the course. And I started talking about the fact that I wasn't great at spelling, and other teachers in this environment were also talking about it too. So it sort of opened up the door for people to be able to say, oh, this is the thing that was missing from my education. That's the reason I couldn't read. Not I couldn't read because I have an intelligence issue,
Yeah,
because I'm not smart. That definitely was. And, I think that's probably what drives this business is the fact that there's so many kids out there that truly believe that it's their intelligence or
Mm,
that they're not smart enough when it has nothing to do with that.
yeah.
It's all goes back to how they process sounds, having the right technology, having the right methods, and then having the right teaching philosophy to go along with that to help support the confidence side of things that they run into.
Mm.
Yeah.
So when you look at a child and they're falling behind,
Yep.
or the teachers have flagged that there's some sort of learning difficulty or delay. When you look at that child, are you looking at this child from the perspective of, okay, what's wrong with them versus maybe what foundations are missing or what gradients were skipped on their way to where they are now? Like if
Mm,
I took my child to you and I said, look, he's in year 4, he's actually testing in year 2.
mm.
Um, what is your approach, or how do you view that situation that's perhaps a bit different to other educators or other places?
Yeah. One of the first things that I do, which I've always done, even from when I was tutoring just from my dining table, is I always tell the child that's in front of me that the problem isn't you, the problem is how you've been taught. And so instantly I want to shift the idea that the problem is in with them and that they're not fitting into the classroom and shift that to, no, actually, you just haven't had a teacher that's been able to accommodate for the way that you learn. And given the right way, you're going to learn and you're going to progress just like everybody else. And the minute even you just tell them that and you give them that confidence in themselves and you give the parents the confidence that, oh, actually, it's not my child that's not making it. He just hasn't had the right support. It changes from that moment on.
Yeah, wow. And is there a situation where you do have to take into account various diagnoses or learning difficulties with the child? Because, I'm of the opinion that obviously there is multiple factors that influence a child's learning capacity,
Yeah.
right? You've obviously got what we know about dyslexia, ADHD,
Mm.
all the different labels.
Yeah.
I guess where do you find that that line becomes productive and unproductive, say for the child's own understanding about themselves and how they experience a classroom environment versus um, perhaps, that being a very productive thing to have known about a child? That makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah, well, I think that you definitely still have to. In no way am I saying you don't take into consideration the diagnosis or the challenges that that child's facing, whether that be a physical thing like global learning delay or a hearing impairment or something physical or mental or whatnot. But it still comes back to the fact that they've got something going on, and then it's finding a way that they can have access to the same information as somebody else that doesn't have those things. So the viewpoint's still the same in that we're still looking at solutions. We're still looking at ways that we can adapt the learning to fit the student. We're not trying to change the student to fit into the classroom. We're trying to change the learning and the way that they get the delivery to fit the student. And I've seen that. I've worked with kids that have had cerebral palsy. I've worked with kids that have had, ASD, ADHD, speech impairments, like all sorts of different challenges that they're facing. And the one thing that I can say is that there is not one child that I haven't seen that hasn't made progress or learnt. Every child can learn.
Yeah, well,
And it's just going to be all different, different paces. And sometimes the milestones, they look different, and this is what we're really good at, what I'm really good at, and my team is really good at, is being able to spot progress and being able to, point that out to the student. Because in a classroom environment, a teacher can't do it. She's got 25 plus kids. She might have 5 kids that need additional support in that classroom, and she's trying to get through all the curriculum that she's got to fit into, all the teaching days of that year. So they're not able to sort of be able to see these little milestones or growth that we can see and that we can then point out. And it's interesting how much a student changes when you actually acknowledge those little growths, and how much that by acknowledging that growth, and then they start to build up this confidence, and how much that confidence then changes what they're showing you that they can do. So
interesting.
yeah, that's really important as well.
Yeah, totally. And like, we know so much about these different learning challenges now. Do you think that the education system has caught up to that? Because obviously this wasn't around, 20 years ago.
Mm,
Diagnosis dyslexia wasn't like a huge thing or anything like that. But now the awareness is so big, but there hasn't really been any change in the education system. It seems
Mm,
like that the curriculum's designed to work for most. And if you fit in that most category, you get by. And if
mm,
you don't, you fall behind, and that's just bad luck.
yeah.
What's your thought on that?
Um, I think I've dealt with a lot of different schools across Australia. So public schools, Catholic schools, private schools, rural schools, you name it, we've dealt with it. And I think that they're all like within the industry, we definitely know that we have to sort of adapt teaching and that there are a lot of kids that do need intervention work. So I think that there's an awareness there. The issue is that the amount of kids that we have versus the resources and the funding that schools have just doesn't match up.
Mm,
And, there's more and more kids, the classroom sizes continue to grow, the population continues to grow. And meantime, we're struggling to have, qualified, enthusiastic teachers who stay enthusiastic because we have a lot of amazing teachers that, after 5 years of teaching, they want to leave. And they want to leave because of what we're talking about right now. They see that, intervention's so important and they see that it's not a one size fits all approach. But then if they were to try and do, for example, like what we do with our students for every student, they would just burn out. They don't have enough hours of the day. They don't have enough resources. So I think that's what we're hitting up against. And some schools do it better than other schools because maybe they have, the resources look different, the leadership looks different, but they're all facing the same problems.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And look, you've pointed out some pros and cons, I think, on both of those scenarios. So, what do you think the education system is getting right, and what do you think they're getting wrong?
Well, I think that the education system in the last, I'd say 10 years, have tried to move into a direction where they are acknowledging that, we do have kids that that aren't sort of they're not flourishing in the classroom environment. And so there is a lot more professional development that I see leadership trying to put into schools. I think some social and creative aspects that are going into schools are really cool. I know that there's schools that are trying to put in more, creativity. So going back to trying to have kids connect with what interests them and what their likes are and that kind of thing. So um, I think and the community that the schools build is really good as well. Um, that community sort of feel they do really well. Um, in terms of what they don't do so well, it's definitely being able to identify when a child's falling behind. I think that always hits too late, or a lot of the time hits too late, right? There's no absolute. So I'm sure there are times where they pick it up early, but for the most part, we see that it gets picked up really late. And what that does is it makes early intervention really hard for the parent to access. The other challenge I think that we hit is the training, like teacher training. So I know that, when I went through university, and this is going back a while now, there was, a unit that I did on diversity in learning. It was like one unit, 10 weeks. And, what would you do to differentiate your lessons? But then when I went into my professional development, my placement to become a teacher, I was like, this is like pretty much everything that you do in a day. You go into a classroom and you just have all these different. I was sort of expecting to go into a classroom and that everybody in grade 6 would be at the same level and it would be super easy. I would do one lesson and they'd all get it and it would just carry on from there. Because going back to when I was in school, I thought I was the only one falling behind. Everybody else was at the same sort of pace. So I had that idea. And then I went into the classroom and I was like, okay, those 5 know that. Those 5 are falling really behind. Those 5 are bored over there. And those 5 don't even know what's happening. And, to try and differentiate my teaching, I mean, I did do it and I did it really well. And that's why I've gone into intervention because that's what I love, is being able to really get to know a kid and then find exactly what they need and then see them progress. I love that. But as a classroom teacher, if you sort of went in there with that passion, you would burn out pretty fast because it's just near to impossible to do for all your students all the time.
Yeah, totally, totally. I remember this story you told me. I think it was when you were on your placement. So university, you have placement. You go in the schools, and you were teaching, or you were working one on one with one of the students, and they were very far behind. I think it was in maths.
Yeah.
And this particular student was, so far behind that you were concerned enough to speak with the teacher.
Yeah.
And the teacher told you something. I can't quite remember the words you said, but I think that's a great story about, you first coming to realize, hang on a minute, we don't have the proper support structure in place to
Mm.
support these kids who are falling behind.
Mm.
What was that story there?
Yeah, that was a grade 6. There was a grade 6 class that I was teaching, and one of the students, she was sort of at a grade 2 level, I'd say, roughly. And I decided that this one maths lesson that I took, that I would work with her for the last 15 minutes of the session. And I started working with her, and I realized how far behind she was. I mean, to the point where, some place value stuff wasn't really consolidated. So she was really struggling. And anyway, I worked with her, and she made some progress in the session. And then at the end of the day, I went to the teacher that was, teaching that class normally, who was overseeing my placement. And I said, hey, this little kid, let's just call her Jessica. Jessica, I've worked with her for the last 15 minutes. I noticed that she's like really far behind. What's the plan for her? And he said, oh, well, what you just did with her in that last 15 minutes is more than she would have got in the last 6 months of being at school in maths. So that's great. And I was like, okay, but what about moving forward? He's like, well, there's nothing we can sort of do. We hope that she maybe goes into a school next year that's like a special type of school that might be able to have less numbers and be able to accommodate her more. And I was just like, that didn't seem like that was good enough for me. I couldn't go a whole year teaching that student knowing that she wasn't going to progress, and that maybe if she got a couple of things here and there, that was, a couple of concepts here and there, that was going to be good enough. Especially because when I worked with her in that 15 minutes, she was such a bright girl as well. Like, yes, she was behind, but she was really bright. And I think that just that having that view that I have of like, you can learn, and I'm going to sit here and we're going to do this until you've got it. She was like, that gave her the boost of confidence rather than being ignored for, a 50-minute session where she was given, sometimes just what we call busy work, like a
Wow.
worksheet or something.
What is that? Busy work?
Busy work is just like giving the students something that that they can do independently that's going to keep them quiet whilst we're trying to, teach the rest of the class or a particular group.
Okay, so it's a way of keeping kids occupied while we sort of get around to everybody else, or?
Yeah, well, let's be real. You got 25 kids. So anybody that's tried to control a room of 25 kids, like you've got to come up with strategies where, you can manage, because it becomes because the thing is that it becomes a behavioral management tool rather than a teaching tool, because of the way, because of the one size fits all approach that we've got to sort of take when we've got, a big group of kids. You've got to have these sort of techniques where you can manage the masses,
Wow. Interesting.
Nah.
Okay, so back to Pioneers for a second, because you've built a monster in a good way.
Yeah.
And so Pioneers now has more than 50 specialists supporting hundreds of families across the country. What's the hardest part of scaling something this personal? Because obviously you've told us your story. This is not a job for you. This is like passion and a duty and a responsibility that you feel for helping kids, which is amazing.
Yep.
How do you scale out that vision and have other team members imbue those initial motivations and things that you hold dear to your heart about this company specifically? I can imagine that's probably challenging.
Oh, totally. So I think one of the things that a lot of small business owners face is that you develop something, or you create something like a business or a brand, and then that brand is you and your philosophies and the way that you do things. So I remember I was getting such good results, but I realized that I was only going to be able to help a very limited amount of families and a very limited amount of kids if it was just going to be me. So when I started scaling the business, the two areas that I focused the most on was training and hiring and training. They're like the two main areas. So in our hiring department, we have our team in that area are they know our product, or they know our service, They know what Pioneers is about. They know the philosophies. They know my story. They know exactly the type of people that are going to be really good in this position, the type of people that are going to talk to our families like we would talk to our families with that amount of passion, that have the right qualifications and skill sets, and also the willingness to learn more as well so they can learn our technology and be able to use it and get results with it. And then the second part is the training part. So we have a training department who is amazing at being able to make sure that they can train people and then offer them the support and the professional development so that they can, again, get those same results and, make sure that every Pioneer session looks as if, I were taking the session.
Yeah, totally. I can imagine that's a pretty hectic job to do that.
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, is there a specific child or a specific case that you still carry with you? Because obviously you're probably predominantly out of the actual tutoring now.
Mm-hmm.
Is there one child or one case that you still hold dear to your heart that you go, okay, this is exactly why I built Pioneers?
Yeah. There's one little girl. Let's just call her Emily. And Emily came to me when she was in grade 1 and she couldn't read. I mean, her spelling was not even, you couldn't even match up the letters to the word that she was trying to spell. But she was very bright, enthusiastic, and quite artistic. She did dancing and gymnastics. And I remember her mother coming and talking to me about her diagnosis, and that she was hoping that she would just be able to get the very basics because she was so severely dyslexic that it was not. I think that the idea of her being able to read like a chapter book was completely diminished. Like they were just sort of like, no, that's not. We just want her to be able to sort of read very basic things and be able to write maybe, be able to type an email sort of. That was the idea. And I started working with her, and within probably 6 to 12 months, we saw a huge shift in her progress. And she did intervention for quite some time. So she was with us until she was in grade 6. But by grade 6, she was reading at standard. So we'd gone from grade 1, where it was like all hope was lost, to, and that is a fair bit of intervention. But she loved the intervention, and the results that she was getting were amazing. That when she went into year 7, she didn't need it anymore.
Wow.
It was like, and she went into a mainstream year 7 school as well. It wasn't like, she went into a special school or, another option.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Wow. That's incredible. So is the idea with the intervention stuff that's
Oh, sorry. There was also another little boy. I'm just remembering now. Sorry. There was another little boy. Let's call him Ben. And Ben came to me in prep, and his mum was, no, sorry, he was in grade 1. And his mum said that in prep, he had all these behavioral issues and that he was really naughty in the classroom, and that the teacher just kept complaining to his mum all the time that, he couldn't read, and he was having all these issues in school. And after 6 months of intervention, not only did he catch up, but all the behavioral stuff stopped as well. And that's when I started to realize as well that there was all these behavioral things that were coming about because kids that couldn't read. And then, thinking back to my own experience in school, how that was true for me as well. So that's another big one as well, was seeing that big shift in him and just knowing that if he didn't have that intervention, that would have continued and maybe escalated into, something more.
So obviously we're going to start asking this at the end of each and every podcast episode. And it comes from your book that hasn't been released yet, but I've had the opportunity to read it, which is good. And it's called Your Child is Not the Problem.
Mm.
So when I say those words, your child is not the problem, what does that mean to you?
It means that it gives parents the confidence that if they look for an alternative or a solution, that there is a solution. It doesn't involve making the child wrong or having the view that there's something wrong with the child. It's having the view that there might be something wrong with the way that we're teaching the child or the way we're responding to the child. And so I think that gives parents confidence to back up their kids.